This is the image that defined the 20th century, a pillar of fire and smoke reaching for the heavens. It's the image we're told ended the most destructive war in human history. The story is simple, powerful, and taught in schools across the world. In August 1945, to avoid a bloody invasion of Japan that could have cost 1 million lives, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The shock was so profound, the devastation so absolute, that the Japanese government had no choice but to surrender. The bombs, we are told, were a necessary evil, a terrible but ultimately life-saving end to a terrible war. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the textbook version is too simple? For decades, a growing number of historians have challenged this narrative, pointing to other factors, other timelines, other motivations. To understand the decision to use the bomb, you have to understand the sheer horror of 1945. Germany had surrendered, but the war in the Pacific was a relentless meat grinder. The strategy of island hopping had brought American forces to Japan's doorstep, but at an astronomical cost. The Battle of Okinawa, which ended just weeks before the bomb was dropped, was a terrifying preview of what an invasion of mainland Japan, codenamed Operation Downfall, would look like. Over 12,000 Americans were killed, an estimated 100,000 Japanese soldiers and another 100,000 Okinawan civilians died. Japan's military leadership showed no sign of quitting. They were preparing the entire civilian population to fight to the death with bamboo spears if necessary. Kamikaze attacks, a symbol of their fanatical resistance, were sinking American ships. To the planners in Washington, the math was grim. An invasion could mean hundreds of thousands, perhaps over 1 million American casualties, and millions of Japanese dead. But there was another war being waged, a war from the air. Long before Hiroshima, the United States was systematically firebombing Japanese cities. On the night of March 9, 1945, Operation Meeting House sent over 300 B-29s to drop incendiary bombs on Tokyo. The attack created a firestorm so intense it was visible from space. It killed an estimated 100,000 people in a single night, more than initially died at Hiroshima. By the summer of 1945, 67 Japanese cities had been reduced to ash by conventional bombing. This raises a critical question. If the firebombing of city after city hadn't forced Japan to surrender, why would the destruction of just 2 more make the difference? Meanwhile, in the deserts of New Mexico, a secret of unimaginable power was nearing completion. The Manhattan Project, a colossal undertaking of science and industry, had produced a weapon based on the power of the atom. They called it the gadget. On July 16, 1945, they tested it. The result was beyond anything they had imagined, a sun brought down to Earth. J.R. Robert Oppenheimer, the project's lead scientist, famously recalled a line from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
President Truman, who had only learned of the bomb's existence after becoming president in April 1945, now held this apocalyptic power in his hands. He was at the Potsdam Conference with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin when he received the news. He issued an ultimatum to Japan: surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan did not respond. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay flew over the city of Hiroshima, a major military and industrial hub which had, until then, been largely untouched by the war. At 8:15 a.m., it released its cargo, a uranium bomb called Little Boy. It detonated 2,000 feet above the city. There was a silent, blinding flash. A wave of heat incinerated everything within a mile. A shock wave followed, flattening nearly every building. Tens of thousands of people were killed instantly. Tens of thousands more would die in the following days, weeks, and years from horrific burns and radiation sickness. 3 days later, on August 9th, with no surrender from Tokyo, a second bomb, a plutonium core weapon called Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. The story repeated itself. Another city, another 40,000 to 70,000 lives erased in a flash. The atom bomb, the harnessed power of the universe, has ended the war and saved countless American lives. For decades, the case for the bombs, often called the orthodox or traditional view, rested on a few core arguments. First, and most importantly, it saved lives. Projections for Operation Downfall were terrifying. Secretary of War Henry Stimson argued the bomb was, quote, the least abhorrent choice used to avoid an invasion that could have been a bloodshed for both sides. Second, it ended the war quickly. A prolonged conflict with continued firebombing and a naval blockade would have led to mass starvation and the deaths of millions of Japanese civilians anyway. And third, Japan's leadership was so fanatically divided that only a shock of unprecedented magnitude could break the deadlock. Even after Hiroshima, the military faction of the government wanted to fight on. For this side of the debate, the bomb was the decisive, war-ending event. It was a terrible, but ultimately life-saving end to a terrible war. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the textbook version is too simple? Revisionist historians argue that the million lives saved figure was an exaggeration created after the fact to justify the use of the bombs. More importantly, they point to another cataclysmic event that happened at the exact same time. Remember the date of the Nagasaki bomb, August 9th. In the final days of the Potsdam Conference, Truman had secured a promise from Stalin. The Soviet Union would declare war on Japan 3 months after Germany's defeat. On August 9, 1945, between the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Soviet Union kept that promise. Over 1.5 million Soviet troops invaded Japanese-occupied Manchuria. They shattered Japan's elite Kwantung army in a matter of days. For the Japanese government, this was a strategic nightmare. Throughout 1945, they had been trying to negotiate a conditional surrender, and their one hope for brokering a deal was the still neutral Soviet Union. When the Soviets invaded, that hope evaporated. Suddenly, Japan wasn't just facing an American invasion from the south, they were facing a Soviet invasion from the north. The strategic situation had become absolutely hopeless. Historian Tsuyoshi Hasegawa argues that the Soviet invasion, not the atomic bombs, was the knockout blow that forced Japan's surrender. The timing is undeniable. Hiroshima on August 6th, no surrender. The Soviet invasion on August 9th, the Emperor and his council move immediately towards surrender that same day. So, was the bomb less about defeating Japan and more about sending a message? Some historians argue the bombs were the first shot of the Cold War, a demonstration of terrifying new power aimed not at Tokyo but at Moscow to keep Stalin's ambitions in Asia in check. So which was it, the bombs or the Soviets? The truth, as it often is likely somewhere in the middle. The debate isn't about one being the only cause, but about which was the primary cause. The most compelling modern consensus is that Japan's surrender was caused by two shocks delivered at the same time. The atomic bombs provided a powerful, face-saving excuse for the peace faction within the Japanese government. They could argue to the hardliners that they were not surrendering to conventional defeat, but to a scientific marvel, a miracle weapon that no nation could resist. It allowed the emperor to issue his famous rescript, citing a new and most cruel bomb. Simultaneously, the Soviet invasion destroyed the military's last-ditch strategic plan and eliminated any hope of a negotiated peace. It slammed the door on any alternative to surrender. The two events, the bomb and the Soviet invasion, worked together. One shattered Japan's military hope, the other shattered its political will.
So, did the bomb really end World War II? The simple answer is that it was a profound factor, but the complex and more accurate answer is that it likely didn't do it alone. The end of the war was a convergence of unprecedented destruction from the air and a strategic catastrophe on the ground. The debate over August 1945 matters because it forces us to look past the simple narrative and confront the uncomfortable realities of total war. It reminds us that history is rarely as clean as the stories we tell about it. But beyond the strategic debates, there is a more fundamental legacy. The bombs didn't just end a war, they opened a new chapter of human existence, the atomic age. They introduced a fear that has haunted humanity ever since, the power to bring about our own extinction. The argument over military necessity may never be truly settled, but the human cost is undeniable. For the hundreds of thousands who lived and died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the strategic debate is secondary. Their story is a permanent, haunting reminder of the world that was born from those mushroom clouds, and a warning that must never be forgotten. What do you think? Was the use of the atomic bombs justified? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into history.